Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Breaking the Ice, the 7th episode of Season 1. This episode was written by Maria and Andre Jacques Maton and was directed by Mike Windell. It aired on November 7th, 2001. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
All right. On this episode, Enterprise discovers a very large comet and, while trying to retrieve a rare element, they must deal with a Vulcan ship observing them and causing T'Pol to face a tough choice.
Okay, let's deploy those subspace transmitters and get into this episode. Abby, what are your thoughts on Breaking the Ice?
Well, let's start with the cold open. As regular listeners will know, I'm a fan of a good cold open, and this one is so pretty. That comet effect holds up 20 years later. It is a beautiful comet, and to see our characters and our crew reacting to that comet is beautiful. And all throughout the episode, I have to say, the shots with the comet and the ships by the comet and the people on the comet, it's absolutely gorgeous. So props to the special effects people for making one that really holds up for the test of time.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful also, and this was a great way to open this episode. And I have to say, I really enjoyed this episode, Abby. It had that feeling of exploration for me. I know that Enterprise Season 1 is all about them being explorers and everything being new. And I think after the rollicking Andorian incident last week, it was kind of nice to have this quieter character study type of episode where they're exploring again.
I agree. And if you think about this season as a book, we're at the part that you would get to in a novel where you do need to have some character exploration, and you need to have some of those little nuances and those little threads that are starting to weave themselves together come back and form tighter bonds. And that's what we're seeing here. This is a very nice character episode, and it is just easy to watch, and it goes quickly, and it's a good one for Season 1, even though it's not one that always gets the fanfare that it deserves.
Yeah, I agree. And when I watched it several times, I realized that even though it is quieter and more of a character study, they do pack a lot into it. There are a number of really important scenes that plant seeds for the future, talk about ongoing relationships. And I think there's quite a bit packed in here that's of importance to the crew.
Agreed. And a perfect segue to one of the next points I wanted to talk about, which is when Trip and T'Pol are in the mess hall late at night. She comes to get tea. He's come for his saved piece of pecan pie. And first of all, I have to say, thank goodness T'Pol has something that isn't just boring. It's green tea, but I'll take it. And that scene was so beautiful, and you can see their relationship growing in this episode from this very first little moment. He knew something was up with her, even though, you could not tell from facial expressions. She wasn't acting agitated. She wasn't really saying anything, but he knew something was going on. And this relationship becomes so central to the whole plot of Enterprise that it's really neat to see that they're really carefully laying the foundations of that relationship growing all the way from this beginning point.
Most definitely. You're right. She doesn't say much, but the way that she pauses and seems distracted, he really picks up on that. Trip seems very attuned to T'Pol's emotions in this one.
And I wish I could eat pecan pie. Just saying. I am allergic to nuts, but it looks so good in this episode.
Oh, yeah, that did look really good. And I also like the handle that T'Pol had on that glass cup of tea. That was really cool.
You know, that kind of makes me think about all of the things that T'Pol has in her quarters, all have that same simple aesthetic. And some of that I think is like the ship, like you're saying, the handle of the mug, very simple and clean, but has some movement to it. Her whole quarters look like that. So that was a perfect mug for T'Pol to have tea in.
And I really liked when Trip said that her quarters were cozy. I liked that they showed the candles and they kind of set the scene for, we're going to see T'Pol's quarters quite a bit. And I like that they showed that Trip picked up on that. And might I say, I love that burgundy meditation blouse she was wearing, and I want one of those.
Yep. I don't always think I would enjoy her fashion choices, but that one I would totally wear.
Yes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the children's drawings at the beginning of the episode.
Go for it.
First of all, Abby being a teacher and me being a former teacher, I'm sure I speak for both of us when I say that this scene warmed our heart.
Sure did.
I love when T'Pol says this rendering is crude but surprisingly accurate.
That describes a lot of children's art.
Yes, that was a great quote. And I loved that drawing also that they were showing. And when Flock says that he wants to hang up one of them in sick bay, that was really sweet.
Yeah, and I think it was really nice that this shows that their relationship with T'Pol has taken one more layer of trust and closeness, because this kind of joking and silliness almost, she would have totally shut it down even 3 or 4 episodes ago. But especially after everything that happened last week, I think that she and Trip, she and Archer, then she and Phlox, they all are feeling more comfortable with each other. And they can have some of that camaraderie that comes with both working and living with the same people.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely progressing and much more comfortable. And the other thing that I liked about that scene was it made me think about how important the NX-01 must be to the people back home, that they're all, getting updates on what's happening with our Warp 5 ship, and we're communicating with children and classrooms. I like that it showed that connection to back on Earth that we don't see that often in Enterprise.
That is a really nice little insert, because I think about back when our space program was developing, and back even when I was a child in the 80s, how launches were a huge deal and everything stopped at school and you watched it, and everybody stopped at work and you watched it. And it was a huge production and everybody was excited and it was wonderful. And I can only imagine how much more you would feel that when you were sending your first Warp 5 ship out into the galaxy.
Definitely.
So I want to talk about Malcolm for a moment.
Yes.
Okay. So when they're in the scene and they're talking about possibly landing on the comet, and this is great work chat. They're all back and forthing about, well, there's this rare element and we could study it, and how do we get it? And once Malcolm starts talking about the portable drilling rig, he is trying so hard not to be so excited, because we've talked about how he's very professional. But the second time I watched this episode, I noticed that after he says portable drilling rig, his face is literally lit up and he's kind of rocking back and forth, not a lot, but enough to be noticeable. Like he is chomping at the bit to go and land on this asteroid and drill it. And I find that very endearing.
Abby, I'm with you on this. Very delightful throughout Enterprise. I love when they show Malcolm's excitement, and, Dominic Keating does a great job with that. You're right. He gets these facial expressions, whether he's talking about blowing something up or drilling on the comet. He does. He gets this little look on his face of joy, of glee, and it is very endearing. Since you mentioned landing on the comet, I wanted to mention that when they do land the shuttle pod on the comet, you can hear Archer's theme playing at that moment. And that was a beautiful segue with the shuttle pod landing as Archer's theme was playing. That was really nice because I love Archer's theme.
Well, I noticed that too. And I thought it was really nice because they were half joking that, no one had seen this comet before and we could call it Archer's comet. And so he might not actually be on the comet, but his theme is playing and they are there in spirit. And that was a beautiful little nod to our captain.
Yes.
So I think we need to backtrack a second and talk about when the Vulcans show up, because they kind of are the catalyst of this episode. And I want to say, first off, wow, Captain Archer has more restraint than I do, because I don't have practice with Vulcans like he does. So I'm sure he's held his tongue and diplomatically stated things many times before. But man, Captain Vanek did not make anything easy from the get-go when he's asking, are you lost? And then all the way through this episode, he is just a prickly and obstinate on purpose, even more than the normal Vulcan. And so props to Archer for the most part, completely keeping his composure and thinking on his feet for answers that could get his point across while still being diplomatically sound. But after the first one, when he calls and Archer gives T'Pol the look and calls her back to his ready room, that's like getting called in the principal's office. And the looks on the other crew members was impeccable. And it got me thinking that Archer has just had a very intense traumatic experience at Pecan in our last episode. Now, we don't know exactly how much time has taken place, but it's not a great deal. So I feel like he's a little less immediately trusting of Vulcans than he was. And he wasn't particularly trusting of them to begin with. And I think that he still has, lasting effects, or his thoughts on Vulcans overall has changed since Pecan and since they've, been seemingly being followed since then. And I think he has every right to feel those feelings.
That's a really good point. First of all, I agree. Archer is clearly biting his tongue throughout this whole episode. And I know we'll talk about it later, but that dinner scene with Vanek was so well written and so well acted. I mean, the tension there, Archer trying to hold on till the very end when he, accuses him of spying. That's all done super well. I actually had a question for you about this. Do you think that Archer is being observed specifically because of Pecan, that the Vulcans are keeping a close eye on him?
I think they were keeping an eye on the humans, but since then, they are really keeping an eye on the humans, because the humans just came in and blew up their spying on the Andorians. And so, yeah, I think they're definitely watching them closer than they were before after that.
And since we're talking about Captain Vanek and the Vulcan presence, I just wanted to mention for the record that I love Vulcan ship design and I love Vulcan writing, Vulcan script. I think both of those are done so well in Enterprise. Just beautiful.
And this is the first time in Enterprise that we see Vulcan ships out there. We've talked about them a lot, but this is the first time that we see one. And yes, I agree. They are both absolutely stunning. So let's move on to the message, because that kind of kicks off this next chunk of everything. So I enjoy that we as an audience see T'Pol get the message before anybody else on the crew realizes that she got a coded message. And we kind of know ahead of time it's not good. Again, she doesn't show a huge expression. She doesn't get upset. But watching her read the message, again, so many props to Jolene Balak for doing so much with so little. And she has so much control over her facial muscles. It's incredible, because one little eye tick means so much. And that close-up is a perfect example of it. But it really says a lot to me that when Trip comes in and tells Archer that there's an encoded message, that he's disappointed before anything else. That speaks volumes to their relationship, that he's not mad. He's not even suspicious. He's just really disappointed. And as someone who works with people, I know that's the worst. Like, it's worse than being mad. It's worse than upsetting someone. It's worse than almost exploding, is that knowing that somebody that you care about has disappointed you. That's deep. And you can see when he tells Trip, go tell Hoshi, make it the highest priority. And then he just heaves this sigh and you feel it. You just feel it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I sensed that disappointment also from Trip and Archer because, as we've mentioned over the last few episodes, this trust is developing between them and has continued to develop and progress. So this is definitely a backward step in their mind at this point that they are disappointed. They're sad about that. And I think that's a good observation, Abby.
I also think it speaks to Archer and Trip when after it's decrypted and Trip comes back and he's read it and he knows what's in it and he is feeling so deeply guilty, and that the back and forth between them where he's like, you could order me to tell you, but you wouldn't like it. And Archer's face is just like, oh man, because they both know that they've stepped in something, but their intentions were not there. And I think it speaks so deeply to Trip's character and his respect and connection with T'Pol that he's going to go tell her. He never had to tell her. That could have died right there between them. And Hoshi wouldn't have said anything either. And it could have just gone on. But he felt the need. His ethics and his morals were so strong that he had to go and talk to her about it. And I appreciate that. And, I know a lot of people call him Florida Man. And yes, I'm looking at you, Trek Profiles. But Trip has so many good parts of him that come up. And I think the one that rises to the surface the most is that he is so genuinely caring about the people around him. And he knows he could not continue to have a good, honest, open relationship with T'Pol if he didn't go and tell her what he knew.
Yeah, I was impressed by that also and by his maturity because Archer was cool with letting it go. When Archer said, well, what good will that do? He was definitely willing to let it go, but Trip could not let it go. So I agree. That was another one of those character development parts of the episode that I really appreciated because it's showing a lot about Trip and it's showing seeds of Trip and T'Pol's connection. So I thought that was great. But I have to say that Faye's pistol line was hysterical.
Yes, I agree. It was funny. And that's just their relationship with the banter. And that's fun.
Yeah, I thought that was a great way to end the scene.
So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the fabulous question and answer scene on the bridge where they're answering the questions from the children. And we want to talk about character moments. This is an entire scene that is just full of character moments. I think Hoshi comes off as the most natural, and I think that's not unexpected because she was a teacher. When we first met her, she was teaching people language. So this is a natural thing for her, and I think she's just warmed up to her question so easily. And to see Phlox, who can't help himself, and that is just Phlox so much. And of course, the poop question, and poor Trip. Having to be the comic relief. But you know what? As someone who works with young kids, that is such a question would really ask. That is a question that will come up.
Oh, yeah.
It's something they're really curious about. And as we know later on from Discovery, they really do continue to recycle everything on a starship or a starbase into other things. And that's kind of incredible. But, I might not ever look at the crew's boots the same way.
I loved this scene also. Yeah, Hoshi was fantastic. And it really warms my heart when Phlox says, hello, children. I love that. This was a great scene. And when I thought about it later, I think that Archer's part of it probably was at least a page and a half of a script. That is quite a monologue. And he handled it really well. The whole scene was great. And I know at the end he said, how did we do? I thought they did great.
I think they did great too, but what a humanizing moment for Archer that he can go out and talk to alien species that he doesn't know and not be as nervous as he is talking to a group of school children back home. I know a lot of people like that.
Sure. That makes sense. I thought this was a great scene. Not only was it funny, but I just thought it fit with the episode perfectly. And again, it carried on that beginning part about getting drawings from children. I liked the connection back to Earth. And yes, the poop question was great. So yay for that scene.
I only wish that Travis and Malcolm had been there too, because I would have loved to have seen what they would have done with answers of the questions. But they were busy hanging out on the comet. So we should talk about that.
I really liked the scenes on the comet. I thought the effects were really well done. And it's nice to see Malcolm cut loose a little bit. I enjoyed seeing Malcolm cut loose. But at the same time, I do want to say that after Archer scolded Malcolm about who's the sculptor and we're being observed, the fact that Malcolm did the Vulcan ears after that conversation did not ring true to me. It seemed out of character to me, because to me, Malcolm is a very by the book kind of guy. He knows he's being observed by Vulcans. He's very methodical. We've talked about his professionalism and how serious he is and all of that. So the fact that he made the Vulcan ears, even though I think it was cute and funny, it just didn't feel Malcolm to me. That's the only part of the episode that felt a little off. But it is nice to see Malcolm cut loose a little.
Yeah, I liked how he and Travis were much more informal on the shuttle on the way over, and they were talking like friends and colleagues and, being a little bit more jokey and seeing Malcolm more relaxed. And it is interesting that you bring that up, because after Travis makes the snowman initially and Archer comes on to ask who the sculptor is, you can hear the change in Malcolm's tone of voice from when he was talking to Travis to when he answers Archer. So I would think that would be him feeling, oh no, I got busted and I'm goofing off on the job and my boss noticed. I wouldn't think that he would do the ears either. But, maybe he was just so excited that he finally got to blow something up and like be right there when it happened, that he was letting loose a little bit extra.
Yeah, I hear that. And the other thing I thought of was, I'm not sure if the Vulcans have the same view that the NX-01 has. Like, I'm not sure technologically how they're watching Travis and Malcolm. I know Archer can see him. I don't know if the Vulcans can, but the fact that Malcolm chose the snowman to blow up and it having a Vulcan rendering actually could be seen as a pretty big statement that's kind of intense. Like, he blew up a Vulcan. Yeah. And it may have been subliminal. He may not have planned it that way. But after I watched it a few times, I thought of that and I thought, interesting thing to blow up.
Yeah, I thought that too. But, maybe it's his little way of having his fun as well. We know that he lets loose differently than other people.
Yes. And I like seeing him let loose. And I always love Malcolm and Travis together. And I thought they had some great conversations down there. And I also think the environmental suits on Enterprise are a great costume.
Yes.
I love those suits.
They look like they would be actually functional, but useful and of the time. They're very, very well done costumes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the Trip and T'Pol scene in their quarters. Mm-hmm. But before I move into that, there was one other quote I loved that I forgot to mention when you were talking about Trip apologizing to T'Pol because he felt it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. That is a good scene. And when he says to her, have you ever done anything by mistake that you haven't felt proud of? And she just very clearly says, no. That was so T'Pol. Yes. And I found that so funny. That was great.
I laughed at that one too.
I think the scene in her quarters is so well done. Again, planting seeds for the future. But even though he wasn't her first choice, you can tell that she does clearly want advice from him. And when he says, it seems like your mind is made up, it really did seem like her mind was made up. Like, they had a good conversation. He was asking good questions. He was being insightful. She was, slightly defensive, but trying to answer the questions. And when he says to her, you have an obligation to yourself. Yes. I love that line. That's a good message for all of us. And it really resonated with me. And then when he leaves her quarters, after he says the part about perhaps your subconscious is influencing you, you can really see on her face again, Jolene, that she is contemplating what he said. She's really taking it in. I thought this was a great scene.
Oh, I thought it was a beautiful scene too. And I love that Phlox is the one that sends her to him because she obviously didn't feel comfortable opening up to him. And so when he suggests, is there anyone you feel comfortable with? Obviously, Trip knew the situation. So he might have been that choice. But I also think she's had enough experiences with him to know that he is trustworthy and that he is going to give his honest advice and be a good listener. She's observed him enough to know that this would be a safe person to talk to. And I adore the scene overall because it is kind of a clash of cultures, but it's very respectful both ways. Even when she calls him out and says, "What, are you telling me to go against my whole culture?" And he was like, "Well, no, but that's very much them," and finding a middle ground. And I love that they both make each other think, and that is so in character and so indicative of their entire relationship, is that they grow a lot because of each other. And I thought the same thing when he said, "You have a responsibility to yourself." And that is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. You wake up with yourself every single day. So you've got to make sure that, yes, while taking care of others and doing your duty and doing your job and is all important, if you're not okay, you can't do those other parts. So what a beautiful message.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about this terrible dinner. Like, Archer is trying so hard, and he even went to Paul to get food advice and head chef make special things, and he's doing all the things that would be polite from Earth. And Vanek is like a wall of ice. He is doing nothing. He is giving nothing. He clearly doesn't want to be there. And I loved how, as this scene went on, it felt like Archer was almost weaponizing the polite phrases. And he was saying them, but his teeth were more gritted. His jaw was clenched. His shoulders were up. He was taking those slight pauses before he said things. So what he was saying was just fine, but you could tell how agitated he was getting by the way he was saying them. And then when he, at the end, "Well, where did this time go? Look at that. Escort him back to the shuttle bay." Like, that was hilarious. And that was bravo to Archer, because he lost it, but he reined it back in. And he is still trying so hard to make this work, even though he is getting less than nothing in return.
That's a great description, Abby. I felt the same way. I watched the scene several times. First of all, when this scene starts, the director shoots it from behind Vanek's head, and it sets this tone of him being apart. I really liked that directing choice. And then as the scene goes on, as you said, right, Archer is trying so hard. He's trying everything he can do to put it out there. If you have any questions, ask us. How's your dinner? Blah, blah, blah. And he's getting absolutely nothing. And then when Tripp says to Vanek, "Any hobbies?" That was also another funny line. The tension and the humor worked together so beautifully. And Scott Bakula's acting was so good. I mean, everybody's was. This was a fantastic scene.
Yeah, and I like that even T'Pol, who we know is the Vulcan on the Enterprise crew, she's trying to bridge it. She's explaining to Vanek that this is how Earth people talk. This is what they're asking for. This is traditional for them. This is customary. You know, it's your first time on a ship. She's doing everything she can to try to make it smooth. She really is taking Archer up on, he said, "Just do what we need to do to make him go away." She's trying. I mean, they're all trying.
Yes. She definitely is. And Vanek is not having it. I mean, the fact that he already ate when he was invited for dinner.
He only drinks water.
I wish that we knew what Vanek said.
Yes.
There are several times in episode where they say things like, "You don't want to know," and things like that. We'll get to that later in the series. But I want to know. I know. I want to know what Vanek said. So if anybody out there knows Vulcan or has studied the language, please let us know. I would like to talk a little bit about the ending with the tractor beam, Abby.
For sure.
I really like this ending. There's a few things I want to point out. First of all, anytime Archer takes the helm, I love that. He just moves that guy aside. I'll do it, because he trusts himself. He's an amazing pilot. And I love when Archer takes the helm. So bravo.
It's a nice connection back to the very first episode where we saw him starting to pilot his models with his dad. And as he talks about, you know, going through flight school and going through all of that. Yeah, it's a beautiful touch to see him do it. And it seems very natural every time he does it, which is a credit to Scott Bakula's acting, because I'm pretty sure he hasn't flown a starship.
Right. I think this is also good progress for Archer that he does accept Vanek's help, even though he doesn't want to. He finally realizes that, the safety of his crew is more important than his pride. And I have to say, Abby, once again, this seems to be a recurring theme of our podcast, that T'Pol knows when to step in and when not. She knows when it's absolutely necessary for her to step in and say the right thing. So when she walks over to Archer and says, he's expecting you to say this, why don't you prove him wrong? And you're free to choose, showing what she learned from Trip. Again, T'Pol is saying the right thing at the right time to influence Archer.
That's almost exactly the note that I have written down on my end, too. And I think that shows what a great first officer / science officer she is for him, because she does help him come around to where he needs to be over and over again. And can I just mention, that is one fast-moving comet and sun. Wow. I was impressed that everything was going so fast. It was melting so fast. It was freezing so fast. I am now double impressed with Malcolm and Travis for staying upright and not getting dizzy if that comet was rotating like that. Impressive.
Yeah, I had that thought too. I was thinking, what is it like to stand on a comet? I was wondering about that myself. So yes, props to Malcolm and Travis.
And a shout out to the grapplers. It's always a good time when you see the grapplers come out. And even though they didn't both hit this time, they at least got one, and they gave it a good shot. And had it not been for that rock outcropping, the grapplers would have come through.
Yep, always great to see the grapplers. Well, now we've arrived at Porthos's pick, which is our favorite part of the episode. Abby, what's your favorite part?
My favorite part this time was just a tiny little moment. And it was when Hoshi brought the pad to Trip and Engineering and said, it's in Vulcan, you have to decrypt it. And he goes, you didn't read it? And she goes, nah, I didn't think it would be right. And just kind of wrinkles her nose and shrugs and walks away. That is Hoshi right there. I mean, and she can read Vulcan. So for her to have consciously chosen to not even glance at it because she didn't want to be involved, she was doing her job, but not getting her nose where it doesn't belong. That is so beautiful to see.
That's a great pick, Abby. Hoshi is such an amazing character. And I think in this episode, the scene with her and the children, as you mentioned, was wonderful. And this is another great highlight of Hoshi from this episode, that she has integrity. She has ethics. She did what she felt was right. And you're right. She could glance at that in 3 seconds, just look at it and see what it says. And she chose not to. So I agree with you.
What about you, Melanie? What was your favorite part of this episode?
I think my favorite part was at the very end when Trip and T'Pol have that interaction where Trip says to Archer, it's personal, that interaction.
Yes.
I really liked the look, the glance that they gave each other with no words at the end, which was clearly unspoken, where T'Pol is clearly thanking him in an unspoken way. And they're having this moment of understanding. I thought that was beautifully done. And then to lead that into the T'Pol trying the pecan pie, it's showing again that she's really taking in what the humans have to offer, and she's willing to try more things. So the look between them into the pie, I thought was a beautiful ending of this episode.
I couldn't agree more. This is just a happy sigh of an ending. And I loved Trip's face when he said it's personal, because it was just telling that he was happy that he had made that connection with T'Pol and that he had bonded with her a little bit. And he knows that he helped change her mind, or at least help her decision become made. And that's a big step forward for the two of them. And the pie just was nice. It was T'Pol. I mean, she didn't eat it in the mess hall, but she was doing something that also reinforced that connection. And it was just a lovely little way to end this episode.
For sure.
Accessing library computer data.
And now it's time for the sharing of trivia. Abby, what can you tell us about breaking the ice?
Well, I think that we have talked a lot about how this was a really nice character study. And this is the first episode of Enterprise that did not have Rick Berman or Brandon Braga writing the episode or its story. So I think they were there for kind of the bigger outlines and the overarching themes and relationships of the season. But these little ones they gave to other people. And it's really nice to get that variety in there.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. And as we move on through the series, we're going to have more and more impactful writers join the crew. So that's interesting. I didn't know that they were not involved with this one.
Indeed. What did you find out that's interesting?
First, I want to say that I'm sure the Trek fans out there agree that Star Trek in general as a franchise deserved many, many nominations and awards. And while they didn't receive as many as we would like, they did receive a few. And this particular episode of Breaking the Ice was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Visual Effects. Well deserved.
Yes, we talked about that from the beginning and how it went through the entire episode. So good choice. Sorry it didn't win.
Transfer of data is complete.
All right, it's time for our Vulcan's verdict on a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers. How do you rate this episode, Abby?
Well, this is a really solid episode. And as we talked about, it has great character development. It has beautiful effects. And I like that we got a deeper look into the Vulcan culture after last week when we saw some of the maybe not most flattering pictures of Vulcan. Now we get a little bit more that fleshes that out and expands it. And this was a really good episode for Malcolm and Travis. And while it wasn't anything, earth-shattering giant plots, it was a really good episode. So this one got a 7 out of 10 grapplers for me.
All right. We are thinking alike again on this one. The more I watched this episode, the more I enjoyed it. And the more I got out of it, I saw the layers we were talking about with these fantastic scenes, like the dinner scene and scenes with Trip and T'Pol and Malcolm and Travis. So I also think it was solid, and I gave it a 7 as well.
Woohoo!
If you've enjoyed this conversation, would like to continue the discussion with us, or share your Porthos picks or Grappler ratings or thoughts on the episode, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter and Instagram. What's the best way to reach you, Abby?
Best way to get me is on Twitter, and I'm Abby M. Sommer. That's SOMMER.
We want to thank you for spending this time with us, and we'll be back next time with Civilization, the 8th episode of Season 1. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer. The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.